Hello, everyone. In today's episode, I will tell you about the events of 1994 that led to a surprising discovery. This story took place in the United States. Let's listen to the story of Tim Boczkowski. Tim Boczkowski was a man raising his 3 children alone. His wife, Mary Elaine, called Elaine by everyone, and the mother of his children, suddenly passed away in November 1990, leaving Tim with the entire responsibility of raising their 2 sons and daughter. The loss of their mother was a terrible blow for the children, especially since they were still at an age when they really needed her. When Elaine died, their children were 5, 6, and 9 years old. It was hard for them to understand what had happened to their mom, and it was certainly not an easy period for them. Everyone tried to make things easier for the children after their mother's death, but just a few weeks after her funeral, Tim announced a piece of news to his family that surprised everyone. He decided that they would move out of the house where they had spent the last few years. Nothing was keeping him in Greensboro, North Carolina, where he had lived with his wife for years. She was no longer with him, and the ice cream shop he had run for years had failed. Tim might as well start a new life in a completely different place. He then decided to return to his hometown of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Everyone who knew Tim and his family was a bit surprised by this decision. The loss of their mother had already been a huge blow for the children, which they needed time to cope with. And an additional move to a city where they had no acquaintances seemed to be unnecessary stress for them. These 2 cities were about 435 miles apart and were located in 2 different states. It was clear that once they left Greensboro, they would most likely never return and would never see their school friends again. But Tim had already made his decision and did not intend to change it. After moving to Pittsburgh, everyone tried to settle into their new place. The children started going to school, where they made new friends, and Tim returned to his trained profession as a dental technician. But both the children and Tim missed Mary Elaine very much. They felt her absence every day. And just as it was hard for the children to come to terms with the loss of their mom, it seemed that Tim was coping better with each passing month. Before a year had passed since his wife's death, he began dating other women. He felt that he couldn't live alone and needed a partner by his side. He also believed that if he could find the right woman, she could have a good influence on his children as well. In July 1991, Tim was already with 32-year-old Mary Ann. She even resembled his first wife a bit, wearing similar glasses and having a similar hairstyle. Even the children noticed a strong resemblance between them. However, the most important thing was that she liked Tim's children very much, and it must be said, they liked her in return. All 3 children noticed that Mary Ann cared a lot about them and really tried to make their relationships as good as possible. And although it wasn't easy, the children loved her like their own mother. What more could Tim want? He had found a woman who filled the void left by Elaine's death. And on top of that, she managed to establish an amazing connection with his children. Tim knew she was the perfect candidate for his wife. Mary Ann thought of him in a similar way. For a long time, she had been looking for a man with whom she could spend the rest of her life. But the men she had met so far always lacked something. With Tim, it was completely different. Mary Ann fell in love with him at first sight, and after their first conversation, she knew he was special. She was overjoyed to have met him. And in June 1993, Tim and Mary Ann got married. Everything started to come together for the Boczkowski family. Finally, smiles began to appear on the children's faces. This was a new beginning for them. Tim and his new wife formed a very harmonious marriage, which the children could see every step of the way. There were no arguments between them. They jointly took care of raising the children and maintaining the household. But this idyll did not last long, because just a year after the wedding, Mary Ann's behavior began to change. Tim increasingly complained that she was drinking too much. Everyone who knew her thought she had no problem with drinking, but it was possible that her husband saw more than they did. He claimed she drank too much both at home and when they were on holiday. This increasingly displeased Tim. It was no different on the 6th of November 1994. As a religious family, the Boczkowskis attended the evening service every Sunday. When they returned home, Mary Ann prepared dinner, after which the children went to their rooms and fell asleep. Tim and his wife then decided to watch a film together, and when it ended, the couple decided to use their newly purchased hot tub. It was Tim's idea to install it in their garden. His wife was not particularly fond of the idea, considering it an unnecessary expense, but ultimately the hot tub found its place in their home. And since they owned it, it would be a shame not to use it. Therefore, when the children were already asleep, the couple got into the water, drinking wine. But despite knowing they should stay in for no more than 15-30 minutes, they remained in the water for an hour. After this time, Tim began to get bored, so he got out of the water and intended to go into the house to take a shower. His wife wanted to relax in the hot tub for a bit longer, and Tim left her alone in the water. When she didn't return to the house for a long time, he went to check on her. It was already past 1 in the morning. Maybe his wife had fallen asleep, which wouldn't have been very sensible, or she might have felt faint from sitting in the warm water for so long. And when he went down to the garden, he saw that she was still in the hot tub, but her head was under the water and Mary Ann showed no signs of life. Tim tried to pull her out of the water as quickly as possible, but it was impossible for him. Panicked, he didn't know what to do, so he called the neighbor. Maybe together they could get the woman out of the water and give her first aid. But when the neighbor arrived in their garden and tried to pull Mary Ann out of the hot tub, Tim did not help him at all. Instead, he started calling his parents, informing them of everything. It was really strange. He should have called for an ambulance first, but perhaps Tim was in such shock that he didn't know what he was doing. Only 4 years had passed since his wife's death, and it must have been difficult for him when he saw that Mary Ann might not be alive either. Eventually, Tim's neighbor, seeing the state he was in, called the emergency number himself, summoning help for the 34-year-old woman. Soon, an ambulance arrived, and the paramedics did everything they could to save Mary Ann. Police officers and Tim's parents, who had been informed by him, also arrived at the Boczkowski home. According to what Tim told both the police officers and his parents, his wife had consumed too much alcohol that day. He showed the officers a half-empty jug of wine and said she had also drunk about 13 cans of beer. Thus, everything pointed to the fact that an excessive amount of alcohol could have led to what happened to Mary Ann. The paramedics took her to the hospital, but even there, they couldn't save her. She was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. The police officers on the scene weren't so sure it was drowning. They had many suspicions regarding Tim. They felt his behavior was quite different from how most men would act if their wife had just died. He seemed relatively composed. He didn't shed a single tear. He appeared more worried that the police might consider him responsible for her death. They also noticed the hot tub where they found Mary Ann's glasses and hair tie, as well as 2 towels. The thermometer in the water was broken in half, which could suggest some sort of struggle. The officers also paid attention to what Tim said about his wife. He kept repeating that she had drinking problems, as if trying to convince them that was the cause of the drowning. But when the police looked around the house and went into the garage, where the couple kept empty beer cans, they found only a few cans, all dry. Clearly, no one had drunk from them that day. They must have been there for some time. Another thing the police noticed was a resuscitation mask found near Mary Ann. According to the neighbor, Tim had run into the house to get it. He didn't want to perform CPR without it. However, such a mask is typically used for helping strangers. Why would Tim need it to save his wife? By searching for it, he wasted precious time, which was really puzzling. The police also noticed a scratch on Tim's neck. When they asked him to remove his shirt, it turned out there were many more scratches. He had numerous scratches on his arms and around his waist on both sides. They also saw a bruise on his left leg. It was apparent that all these injuries must have occurred relatively recently. Tim tried to convince the police that the scratches were the result of a massage Mary Ann had given him that evening. However, the officers were not inclined to believe him. Slowly, they began to suspect that Tim might have contributed to his wife's death, but the next piece of information they heard from his parents made them sure it couldn't have been an accident. When they spoke to Tim's parents, They learned that Marianne had left behind 3 children. However, they were not her biological children. She had adopted them shortly after marrying Tim, and their biological mother had died a few years earlier. The most significant thing was that she had died under very similar circumstances, having drowned in a bathtub. How unlucky must one be to bury 2 wives who died in similar ways within 4 years? Could it just be a coincidence? The police immediately contacted their colleagues in North Carolina. They needed to learn more about the death of Tim's first wife. Tim and his first wife met in the late 70s at a club for single Catholics. Both were very religious, and they seemed to make a perfect couple. They married in 1979, and soon their children, 2 sons and a daughter, were born. Tim worked as a dental technician, but he didn't want to limit himself to that profession alone. He had the idea that building a mini golf course and an ice cream parlor next to it could be a great business. Tim believed they could make a lot of money from it. The children, besides Tim, were the most pleased with this idea, as they had constant access to ice cream and burgers. It was like a dream come true for them. They had a happy childhood, and their parents loved spending time with them. They all played together and did various household chores together. It seemed like they were a truly happy family. But everything changed in 1989 when Elaine had a car accident. She was driving to the ice cream parlor with the children when another vehicle crashed into their car at high speed. Fortunately, no one was hurt, but this incident made Elaine look at her life differently. She realized something that we all supposedly know, but most of us only grasp in life-threatening situations. Elaine understood that she had come very close to death and that her life could end at any moment. Therefore, one should make the most of life, living in a way that meets our expectations. And unfortunately, she couldn't say that about her marriage with Tim. It wasn't what she had dreamed of, so after the accident, she concluded that there was no point in staying in this relationship. She was only 33 years old and could still build a life with someone else. So she decided to separate, which her husband wasn't too happy about. Tim accepted Elaine's decision, but he didn't move out immediately. The couple just stopped sharing a bedroom. Each slept in a different room, but Tim was supposed to move out right after the holidays in 1990. His wife agreed to this, knowing he was also having trouble with his ice cream parlor. When he started building the course and the parlor, he hadn't checked everything properly. He didn't notice that there were plans to change the traffic flow, and soon a new road was to be constructed, diverting all traffic from the road where the ice cream parlor was located. When the road was built, the traffic significantly decreased, and the ice cream shop was no longer as profitable as before. The profits were so low that Tim feared he might go bankrupt soon. Elaine was aware of these problems, so she didn't force him to move out immediately. They could delay it a bit. The couple lived under the same roof, but they were merely passing by each other, and it was like this until the 4th of November in 1990. The children were already asleep in their rooms when their daughter Sandy was awakened by some noise. It seemed to be coming from the bathroom. She went to wake her father, and when the boys also woke up and everyone came out of their rooms, they saw their father running around the house, distressed. They didn't fully understand what had happened. They only saw that something had happened to their mother and that an ambulance should arrive soon. Unfortunately, when the paramedics arrived at their home, they couldn't help Elaine, and she was taken to the hospital. Despite their best efforts to save her, the 34-year-old woman was pronounced dead. During this time, the police arrived at the Boczkowski home, and from the very beginning, they suspected it wasn't an accident. First of all, there was no water in the bathtub. Someone could have pulled the plug earlier, but then the tub should have been wet, and it was completely dry. There were no water droplets on the tub, on the shower screen, or on the floor. During their conversation with Tim, the officers learned that the entire family had been to church that day. It was also a Sunday, the same day of the week his second wife died. The dates were also similar, as Marianne died on the 7th of November, and Elaine on the 4th of November. After returning home, the man went to bed immediately, as he was exceptionally tired that day, while his wife spent the evening with her friend, during which they drank alcohol. But after some time, his daughter woke him up, explaining that she had heard some noise coming from the bathroom. When he went to check what had happened, the bathroom door was locked and Elaine was not responding. Tim had to act quickly. He ran for a screwdriver and used it to open the door. Immediately, he took his wife out of the water and lifted her over the bathtub. He thought this might help to get rid of the water that must have entered her airways. When this method proved ineffective, Tim laid his wife on the floor and tried to administer first aid until the ambulance arrived. However, the police officers who were in his house noticed that not everything matched his story. There were no marks on the door that a screwdriver should have left if it had really been used to open it. Tim, who supposedly pulled his wife out of the water, was strangely dry. The officers suspected that he was responsible for Elaine's death, but they had to wait for the autopsy results. When they were ready, the results did not confirm the story Tim had told. No water was found in the lungs, though this did not rule out drowning. According to the pathologist who conducted the autopsy, water didn't always have to be present in the lungs. They also checked the alcohol level in her blood, but it was 0, which completely contradicted Tim's earlier account. There were 3 lines on Elaine's chest, which could have been made when Tim lifted her over the bathtub. There were tracks for a screen in that spot which could have left such marks. Several of the woman's ribs were fractured, which must have meant that when Tim lifted her over the bathtub, he had to press down with great force. Was he really doing this to expel water from her airways? Or was he possibly trying to cut off her oxygen supply? They suspected the latter, but it was just conjecture. The pathologist couldn't determine what exactly caused Elaine's death, and for this reason, no charges could be brought against Tim. Since it wasn't determined to be murder, no one could be accused. But when Tim's second wife died under similar circumstances, Pittsburgh police contacted the officers from Greensboro, and when the new information reached them, Elaine's case was reopened. Investigations into the deaths of the same man's wives were being conducted in 2 different states. First, the autopsy results of Mary Ann were obtained. Her body, especially her legs and arms, had many bruises, indicating that there had been some kind of struggle before her death. When her blood alcohol level was checked, it was found that she had indeed been drinking that evening, but not nearly as much as Tim had suggested. She wasn't very drunk that fateful day, but enough to have trouble defending herself against Tim. The pathologist also noted numerous marks on her neck and petechiae and her conjunctivae, indicating that the cause of her death wasn't drowning, but oxygen deprivation. It wasn't hard to guess who caused them. It was clear that Tim had taken his wife's life, and a week after Mary Ann's death, investigators were able to arrest him and charge him with her murder. While he was in custody, the autopsy results of his first wife were re-examined, and it was determined what had really contributed to her death. Right after the bathtub accident, it was thought that it was impossible to determine why Elaine had died. But when all the information was reanalyzed 4 years later, it was found that, like Mary Ann, she had also been strangled. Tim had killed his second wife in exactly the same way as the first. Since he had gotten away with the first murder, why would he change anything? Investigators suspected that the man might be responsible for yet another death. In 1981, Tim's first wife's brother died. It was a sudden death, and he drowned in a bathtub. His mother was convinced that it wasn't an accident, but that someone had helped him. However, his father didn't want to do anything about it anymore. His son was dead, and finding out the truth wouldn't change anything. And since the autopsy didn't allow for determining the cause of his death, no investigation was conducted, and everything remained in the realm of conjecture. Tim was accused of killing both Elaine and Mary Ann, and since these crimes occurred in 2 different states, he faced 2 separate trials, one in North Carolina and the other in Pennsylvania. But the question remained, why? Why did he kill both women? And it was quickly established that it must have been for money. When he was married to Elaine, he had problems with his ice cream shop, which stopped being profitable. Tim went bankrupt, while his wife had a life insurance policy worth $25,000. He knew his marriage was over. There were no more chances for them, and his wife's death would solve his financial problems. So she had to die for $25,000. It was no different with Mary Ann, only this time Tim probably planned everything much earlier, even when they got married. The couple received a $5,000 gift from Marianne's parents, which they were supposed to spend on furniture. But Tim had another idea. He decided to use the money to take out a life insurance policy for Marianne worth $100,000 in the event of her death. This time the amount was much higher, and when things stopped going well between the spouses, and Marianne even started thinking about leaving her husband and taking the children of whom she was the adoptive mother, it was a signal for him to start acting. And exactly 4 years after the death of his first wife, he killed Marianne in exactly the same way as Elaine. He only had to change one thing, because when he spoke to the police officers after his first wife's death, he talked with disgust about how, during the first aid, the contents of her stomach regurgitated into her mouth, and he felt that taste in his mouth. This would explain why 4 years later, when he had to perform CPR, he made sure to get a mouthpiece first. He didn't want that situation to repeat. The first trial took place in 1996 in North Carolina and concerned Elaine's murder. Tim was found guilty of his first wife's death and sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. However, he still faced another trial in a different state. It took place in 1999, and unlike the previous trial, this one allowed Tim's children to participate. They testified about the events of that day, but also appealed to the jury not to convict their father. Despite the overwhelming evidence that Tim had killed both women, all 3 children still believed he was innocent. They had already lost 2 mothers in 4 years and didn't want to lose their father as well. But the jury made a different decision. Tim was found guilty of murdering Marianne and sentenced to death. However, this sentence was later changed, and for killing Marianne, he was also sentenced to life imprisonment. Tim Boczkowski initially served his sentence in a North Carolina prison, but when new regulations allowed prisoners serving life sentences without the possibility of parole for crimes committed before 1994 to be released early, Tim was eligible to leave prison in November 2018 after 22 years. But he still had another sentence in Pennsylvania, so he didn't go free but was transferred to another prison in another state. But what happened to the children after Marianne's death and Tim's arrest? Initially, they were raised by their aunt and later by their grandparents. But for some reason, they couldn't take care of the 3 children permanently, so they went into foster care. They didn't stay there long, as it was already too crowded, and then they started looking for another foster family. More than 100 families were willing to take care of the children, from which the children eventually chose the family where they spent the next years until they were adults. Randy and Sandy still kept in touch with their father. However, Todd wanted nothing to do with him. He didn't visit his father in prison, nor did he allow anyone from his family to give Tim his address. He didn't want to receive any letters from him, even though his father wanted to contact his youngest son. Todd, however, remained steadfast in his decision. In 2022, Todd, in an interview with a newspaper, said, "In 2003, when I was 18, I decided to join the U.S. military and became a military police officer shortly after. It was the first time that I was on my own, away from outside influences. I began to realize that a lot of things in regards to the murder of my mom and Marianne did not make sense. I still wrestled with believing that my dad was capable of killing somebody. So I visited him in prison to get some answers in 2005. That was the first time that I noticed that he was manipulating me into believing that he was innocent. I had visited him a few times prior to this, but it was the first time that I began seeing him in a different light. A year later, after serving in Iraq, I visited him again and gave him an ultimatum. I told him if he did not tell me the truth, I would be dead to him. A week after that visit, he sent a letter to my siblings and I, saying that he was finally ready to talk about what had happened. So my siblings and I visited him in prison. My father explained what had happened the night of my mom's death and Marianne's death. They had both died the same way. He said that in the heat of an argument with my mom, he wanted her to stop shouting and placed his arm over her mouth when she was in the bathtub until she was unable to breathe. He then said something shocking. My father explained that on that night, I had gone into the bathroom and witnessed what had happened. He confirmed that I was physically present in the bathroom and that he had told me to get out. Even now, I still have no recollection of witnessing my dad murder my mom. After I realized that I was present at that moment, I decided to never see my dad again. Over the years, I did a lot of reflecting. I decided to become a mental health advocate to help others heal their trauma. Validating myself became a vital step in my journey. I'm dedicated to improving myself every day in all aspects of my life. I'm still healing from the events that had happened. It's a continuous journey. I still learn new things about myself every day. Thank you for listening until the end. Goodbye. Take care.